Thank you all so much for joining us from wherever you hail. And we are going to get right to it today. In fact, what we'd like to start off is learning not just where you're from, but what setting do you work in? So we're going to be launching a poll so you can see from each other if you work in a community organization, a foundation, a nonprofit, or if you're a provider, or are you working in a district, school, or state level, or a different environment. If you can just let us know who's with us today, we will share the results of the poll in just a second so we can get a sense of who's joining us today to learn about social and emotional learning implementation and sustainability. So just take a second to click into that poll and let us know.
And votes are slowing down, but we'll give it about 5 more seconds and then take a look.
Great. All right. So most of our audience today, about a third of you, is from a school level and another quarter from a district level. But we see that we've got folks from all different environments working on social and emotional learning. So great to see all of you joining us today from all over the world and working in all different kinds of settings. So let's get into it. Today we're going to talk a little bit about implementation, but before that I'd love to just introduce, for those of you that don't know CASEL, we are the Collaborative for Academic, Social and Emotional Learning. Our mission is to help make social and emotional learning part of every young person's education, pre-K through 12. We do that by advancing the research, by driving quality implementation and practice, by focusing on supporting state and federal policy. And we do this all in collaboration with others in the field and with educators and all of you to really help advance that mission. And we're going to be talking today about sustainability, which is such an important topic because with any implementation of any initiative, sustaining it over time can be really difficult, especially when leaders or champions leave or turn over or budgets change or new initiatives come down or even a new administration. So this conversation today is about what is it about SEL implementation that can really help to make sure that it sustains across the long term. And we've learned a lot about sustainability from our Collaborating Districts Initiative, which we launched our Collaborating Districts Initiative in 2011. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. In 2011, when we launched this initiative, we originally started this as a 3-year research project. And our goal in that research project was to learn about, is this even feasible to implement systemic SEL in large urban districts? When we think systemically, we mean not just a programmatic approach, but really infusing it into the systems. Could you even do that in large urban districts, given how complicated they are? And secondly, what does that look like if you do that? How does that actually work? And if you can do it, what outcomes do we see for kids? And if you're interested in that study and the results of that study, you can actually go to our website to learn more about that. But a couple of interesting points about that study was, first of all, we started with 8 districts thinking that we weren't really sure if we were going to be able to keep all 8 districts for 3 years. And we thought, well, at least if we start with 8, we might have 4 at the end of 3 years. That 3-year study turned into a 6-year study. And then even when the study ended, not only did these 8 districts continue to work together long after the funding was gone and long after the official study was gone, they are still working with each other today. And we've actually broadened that group of districts who are working together. On this next slide, you'll see the list of districts are all over the country. And we've been working with some of these districts now for 10 years. So that answer to the question, can you do this? Is it feasible? Is a resounding yes. And in fact, we've learned a lot about sustainability. And some of these findings even surprised us at CASEL, that these implementations would continue to deepen year over year for now going on over 10 years. So what we did recently is try to look at what are the specific things that these districts were doing that led to the 10-year sustainability. And we used a combination of qualitative and quantitative data and interviews and examination of reports over the years to really boil it down to 6 different areas that we believe are critical for the long-term sustainability of a systemic approach. The first one that you'll hear about today has to do with the leaders themselves who are modeling, cultivating, and elevating a shared vision for SEL. As we know, leadership is so important, and superintendents and other leaders play such an important role in setting the tone and communicating the priority and creating the structures that drive long-term actions. But that is not the only thing that's important, because as you all know, superintendents turn over and leaders turn over. So the second element we'll talk about are the core district policies that actually connect SEL to all different departments and individuals, so that people really feel invested in this work as an individual and for their departmental goals. They see that SEL is a foundation and a catalyst for those different goals across the district and across departments, and that when everyone feels invested, they're more likely to sustain that work. The third one is about schools. We've all seen when schools get an implementation mandate, or we're going to focus on this priority, but then they don't actually have the resources to do that work. We know that schools have to have the resources and support to guide their SEL implementation, but we also know that schools like to have flexibility to customize their SEL implementation to meet the specific needs of their community. And we know it's so important that schools work directly with families and community members to identify the priorities and make sure that their implementation matches the priorities for their local communities. The fourth one is about SEL informing and shaping all adult learning and the staff's culture and climate. This one's about adult SEL. We need to make sure that we are offering all sorts of professional learning so that adults can experience SEL and it can foster their own personal growth, their professional skills, and also help them create supportive relationships with each other, which helps with that sort of long-term commitment to this work. The fifth one is about students, families, and communities co-creating that SEL vision and plan and practices. Getting stakeholder engagement from everyone involved is such a key strategy to make sure that these initiatives and priorities are here to stay. And then lastly, communities of practice are critically important, both externally and internally. These districts have really benefited from working with each other across the country so that they can learn from each other. And they've also committed to creating communities of practice within their districts so that they can create learning opportunities within districts. So principals have each other to lean on, and everyone has places to go where others are doing this work, and they feel that kind of collective efficacy towards systemic implementation. So that's just a quick snapshot of the 6 elements that we've learned are key for sustainability. And now what I'd like to do is introduce 3 of my colleagues on the practice team. I'm thrilled and honored to introduce you to Dr. Bladine Barthelus, who's our Director of Practice Innovations, Sherry Raven, who's our Director of SEL Implementation, and Karen Van Osdale, who's our Senior Director of Practice here at CASEL. These women are not only working directly with those 20 districts to support and learn from their systemic implementation, they themselves used to lead SEL implementation in the districts that they were working in before they came to CASEL. So Washington, D.C. Public Schools, Austin ISD, as well as Chicago Public Schools. These are amazing leaders who led their implementation and are now helping others to do that work and helping CASEL to learn about the work. So welcome, Bladine, Karen, and Sherry. Thanks for joining us today to share about your experiences.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks.
We're excited to be here. Thanks, Melissa, and thanks for that great overview of all of the reflections that have emerged from our work with districts over these past years. So excited to be here with 2 of my favorite SEL leaders, and maybe we can start with just reflecting on our own time as SEL leaders and really, what are the sustainability elements that you feel like really made this work stick in the districts with whom you worked. So Bladine, let's start with you.
Sure, thank you, Karen. During my time in DC public schools, I remember specifically when we were in a situation where, like many of the participants here, our district was in crisis. We were having multiple just climate issues, culture issues, suspension issues. The council, we have a DC council, not a board, but we have a council that was pretty much laying out legislation where we couldn't, suspension was not an option for a lot of our grades. And so we really had to kind of take a step back and think as a district on what we wanted to do differently. And some of the ways that we began to approach some of the challenges that we were facing in our district was by looking at what are the needs that all of our students had. And what is the vision that we could all kind of lock arms around and think through for young people? And we really looked at this idea of students feeling loved, challenged, and prepared. And with that, what were the steps that needed to happen so that students can say that that was their experience in DC public schools? So one thing I would say that we looked at, and it's connected to those 6 elements that, that Melissa just brought up, is we really looked at how do we develop a shared vision among leaders? And how do we create the space for leaders to learn the different SEL competencies that can really be modeled so that this could become the work of not just a few, not just the teachers, but the work of all. And I clearly remember the professional learning sessions. We started with district leaders, which is something that I'd never seen happen before. Typically, sometimes it starts with teachers, but we started with our principals, our assistant principals, our principal supervisors in our Summer Leadership Institute. And throughout the year, we took professional learning time and focused in on each specific core competency of social emotional learning. And then teachers had aligned PL that was happening on their PL days as well, so that they could see their leaders, understand, process the SEL competencies, and really model those out for the teams as well. I'll just say, just in closing on this point, is that starting with the leaders and connecting the PL that they were getting to an overall vision for the district allowed them to have a space where they could really reflect on their own understanding of social emotional learning. They could also identify ways that they could model it in a way that made it become true to life for their staff and then true to life for students as well. So those are some of the ways that we were able to do that. Sherry, what about you? What were some of the experiences you had?
Yeah, that was great to hear, Bladine. We started in Austin in 2011 and made some mistakes that other districts like Bladine's learned from, I hope, because we started with this great urgency of we've got to get to the kids. And started with the students and then really had to backpedal and back up and fill in that 4th element about the adult SEL informing and shaping adult learning and staff climate. We learned within the first year that going to the kids without grounding the adults just didn't work as well. So how do you ground the adults in the work and really build that staff climate? Because we also know that kids are watching us even when they're not listening to us. So if we can't get the staff climate and culture positive and supportive and modeling the SEL skills, it's not going to have the same success with students. And over time, Austin has learned that it's not even just the teachers, it's not just central office, it's not just the leaders, but really every adult. So how do we include the custodians, the cafeteria workers, the bus drivers, the parents? Every adult who touches the children need to have the ability to model SEL skills with those young people. It also includes a lot of cultural awareness and cultural appreciation of each other as adults, to the point that this year, Austin has merged their social emotional learning department and their cultural proficiency or equity department into one, saying these are so intertwined that for the adult work, we need to be working on them at the same time together, which was a huge lesson for them. Karen, how about Chicago?
Thanks, Sherry. Yeah, I think connected to that sustainability element around everyone seeing themselves in this work was key for us early on. I was reflecting back on early in the SEL work, we brought together a team just to really explore what does it mean to integrate SEL with academics. So we brought together all of the core content leaders in the district and really just had our own internal working group where we got into the theory of SEL, the research behind SEL, and then people became very personally invested. We practiced SEL practices amongst ourselves, and then it began to happen that as they were developing coaching models or developing professional learning for math, they were bringing SEL to the table to really think about how SEL could be integrated with all of that work. So it really, I think, helped to sustain that over time and then helped to build that into their curriculum adoption process and their professional learning processes and staffing. I think the other piece that came to mind was in Chicago when we did a massive effort to rewrite our discipline policy and to design professional learning around that new policy and to embed that work into every aspect of the district. I think working with our principal supervisors, our principals themselves, the teachers union, the family and community engagement groups and local community, it allowed us to really deepen everyone's connection to that work and to feel invested in the outcome of that policy and new professional learning. And when something is enshrined in policy, it tends to sustain beyond people and beyond the many years that we've been. So thank you for sharing those reflections.
It's a great point that once it's enshrined in policy, then it tends to stick. So we all left our districts and went to work for CASEL and stepped out and now are supporting districts across the nation. So let's zoom out a little bit and think about the districts that we're supporting now. What are you seeing that's helping with sustainability in the districts we're working with now? Karen, you want to start us off this time?
Sure. I think we all have the incredible privilege to work with our districts across the country in their own community of practice. And, I have seen over the years and experienced for myself over the years, the power of that community. I think currently our CDI teams are bringing together their SEL leadership, their equity leadership, their research and evaluation leadership in a team that's really in a very honest and authentic way digging into, where are we in this work and where do we want to go next and how do we measure the impact of our work over time. They, having this dedicated space and time and a focused piece of work together, I think is becoming a really powerful lever for advancing their work. And I've also just seen folks really become like a family and a lifeline and texting each other when they need something and really reaching out and seeing that we can learn from one another, that we're not alone in this work, but there are people trying to do similar things all over the country. So I think that community of practice piece has been an incredible learning for all of us. Bladine, what are you seeing with districts?
Now, there's a lot of great work happening with the districts that we are partnered with. And one element that I do want to elevate is oftentimes there isn't enough resource funding, staffing to go around to actually make the work of SEL as systemic and sustainable as it needs to be. And when that becomes the case, and if it's not the case now in a district, it could be the case in 2 years from now. Like we've had kind of the run of almost every situation happen within a district. But when that is the case, that you don't have that, what we have found and what I have seen happen is your ability to integrate SEL into what happens into the fiber of the district allows it to become systemic, allows it to become sustainable, and allows it to live in several different offices. And one great example that I have of that is in Guilford County Schools in North Carolina. When we just partnered with Guilford, they had one SEL director and absolutely no team. They had an amazing vision for SEL. They had an amazing vision for changing opportunities and environments for young people and creating a space where all young people could thrive. But the staffing wasn't there. I mean, we made the suggestion for the staffing to be there, but it wasn't there initially. And what we were able to do with that dynamic lead that was there at the time was to create a cross-office leadership team that really came together and talked about all things SEL. They looked at their priorities. They looked at the resources that we had. They looked at the rubric that we had and had honest conversations around where are we as a district? Even though we say we want to go here, where are we as it relates to adults and how we model SEL? Where are we in terms of our policies and our resources? Where are we in terms of what we're putting in front of students to explicitly support them in their development of these competencies as well? And was able to actually develop a 3-year implementation plan that was informed by individuals from teaching and learning, from transportation, from food and nutrition. Like when you have a plan like that, that is what can really set you up to have a systemic approach to social emotional learning. So definitely want to encourage you all, like in the work that we've seen, if you can integrate this into more than just one office and really help folks to see how this lives and the responsibility that every office has to do this for young people, it has more of a likelihood of being sustainable and to be the work that carries your district for quite some time. Definitely wanted to share that. Sherry, what are you seeing in the work that you're engaged in?
I'm seeing so many connections between the things we're all seeing. And I think, you've got to build that interconnection within central office. And then I'm thinking about how that partnership has to extend to the schools themselves and to student, family, and community voice, which are 2 more of the elements for sustainability. So when we talk about working with schools, then how do we make that a partnership? How do we not just make it central office saying do this? And we've seen some examples of this. One that happened in Austin after I left, so it's one I've seen not done, is they created a model for their campuses that they call the seed model, like planting seeds, where they have 4 big areas, kind of tied to the 4 big areas in the CASEL implementation framework. So what are you doing in terms of working with students? What are you doing in terms of working with adults? What are you doing for steering committee and guidance? And then within those buckets, they've said to the schools, we're not going to give you the goal to work on in this area. This needs to be yours. So it's that whole loose tight model. How do you say, here's the framework we want you to use, but you, campus, have to decide how to innovate and what's going to work on your campus? Because what works on one campus in one part of town frequently doesn't work on another campus in another part of town. So it's how do we let them have voice and set their goals? And then that moves us right into that. How do we give students voice? How do we give families voice? How do we give community partners like out of school time, faith-based organizations, other groups? How do we bring them in so they're involved in the planning and in the thinking, and not just at the end where we say, here's what we're doing, and here's your one little line, here's your piece, because we know that doesn't build buy-in. They've got to be at the table building authentic relationships. And Palm Beach County has been part of an after-school initiative through the Wallace Foundation, where they're saying, how do we partner with our out-of-school time partners? And all of the communities that have been doing that, and there are 6 across the nation, have been seeing results that way too, that it really benefits students to have that carry through, to know that the SEL they learned during the school day is also going to be reinforced in after school programs. And we've learned a lot about school day from after school too, because they've been doing this kind of work for a long time too. They've been youth centered. So it's all about people at the table, I think is what I've been seeing in my districts lately. Karen or Bladine, anything to add to that?
No, very well said. I think we did want to add in a few other voices, just of the folks who are currently leading all of the CDI districts that were part of the original partnership with CASEL. So with that, we are going to show you about a 5.5-minute video of their incredible wisdom and reflections that will hopefully inspire you in your SEL work.
What would I have liked to have known 10 years ago that I know now?
Why are we doing the work in the first place?
Where do we want to go with this work?
What is the experience we want our students, our teachers to have?
For us, because the other districts already had been engaged in the work for some time, their insight was really helpful for us. Each lead in the districts would advise us focus on adult SEL first.
I would really focus in on making sure that the adults were prepared, that they had what they needed in order to be able to model the SEL skills for kids, that they themselves were well.
You're constantly building capacity and building that understanding. It becomes part of the fabric of what you do.
And I think it's an important indicator. Is a principal who is now talking about social emotional learning with the staff, is integrated social emotional learning practices in professional development or staff meetings, has developed a goal for their school.
Because once an adult experiences those things, they get excited about it themselves and they're eager to share with students.
Equity and social emotional learning are two things that need to be held by everyone.
I also wish we had more equity work from the beginning. I'm very jealous looking at some of the districts coming in who are starting the SEL work with their equity teams and the direction that they're able to take.
And I think in the beginning, it was hard to see where they intersected. You know, we kept saying SEL as a lever towards equity initially, and now we can see in practice where social emotional learning is a necessity to get at good, meaningful conversations in terms of equity and anti-racism.
The importance of having a systems thinking perspective, to understand that you are trying to do this work within a very complex, often chaotic, disruptive system.
There was a thought that, you know, the evidence-based curriculum was the only way to implement social emotional learning. And I think through implementation really came the elaborations of strong examples of academic integration, strong examples of the impact around climate and culture and family and community.
It was only when we were put under the academic department and we started working with our ELA team and our math team and our science team and really look at where social emotional learning could be embedded into our curriculum, into our instructional practices, that our teachers, our leaders started to see where it all fits.
It was really making sure that we had a clear definition of the work and that every single time we were presenting, we were sharing that definition so that there wasn't an opportunity for anybody to not understand what the work was. When we finally had that definition, it took away like the fluff that people thought SEL was.
I believe that's what you're gonna find as you embark on this journey of social emotional learning in your district. It is that missing piece that really pulls everything together in what you're doing.
This work is not on one leader alone, though it may feel that way. It really is about bringing others into this, into the community of social emotional learning.
We can call our friends and colleagues in Atlanta or Alaska or Oakland or wherever. And, you know, when you feel like you're stumped or lost or overwhelmed, they're right in there with you.
We were able to move one of the large urban districts in the country into the realm of SEL, where every day more of the folks and the stakeholders in the district are asking, how do we do this? How do we include SEL in what we're doing? That to me is a major accomplishment.
Authentic relationships.
It's really the connections that help to pave the road to having a sustainable SEL program or mindset within your district.
Humility. Have humility in this work.
The word illuminate is really about lighting up and creating a light where none exists.
Persistence, perseverance,
resilience,
fulfilling.
Never give up.
So we're going to open it up to, I believe we're opening it up to some questions. But right before we do that, just as you were watching the video, what was a word of advice, Sherry or KVA and or Karen, and even our participants, if you want to drop this in the chat, as you were watching the video, what would be your last word of advice to someone who's beginning this work around social emotional learning?
I was thinking about that. The word that came to mind, perhaps a little different, was seeds. And that was because I tried to think of the work in Chicago as really planting seeds, some of which grew quite quickly and some of which are just popping up now, right? So I think understanding that this is a short and a long game, and having the sense of urgency, but also that sense of patience. Sherry, how about you?
Mine would be time too. Take your time. And sometimes it's hard to hold that belief that it's working, but it is. It just takes time. What's your word, Bladine?
Yeah, the one that keeps coming up for me is learner. To be a learner as well as a leader. And social emotional learning is just one of those aspects in life that we never arrive at. And so giving yourself that grace to just continue to learn and to be a co-learner with those that you are in partnership with to actually implement this is something that will definitely give you space to do the work in a more optimal mental and emotional way. So learner for me.
Love that.
Thanks. What a joy to reflect with all of you. We want to invite our participants in now and start to think about some of those questions and answers. And thank you for sharing your reflections in the chat as well. Lots of resonance with the notion of adults and perseverance and time. So Sherry, one question that came directly tied to one of your points was around, you mentioned bus drivers and assistants and cafeteria staff, how folks were interested in how you actually do the professional learning with those teams, given constraints that might come with contracts or other constraints that may be coming into play. So can you share some of your wisdom on that?
Yeah, it is a challenge. It is a challenge, especially with hourly employees that that are not always in your building. We've seen some districts have great success. Everybody has a beginning of year kickoff. And if you can work with that bus driver supervisor, I saw a woman in Palm Beach lead a training for 1,000 bus drivers at one day, and really get them bought into the idea of they are a community and they're important and they're the first person the kids see that are connected to the school district every morning. So taking advantage of that time, and then if you can work with the leaders of their people so that their leaders are building community with them, that makes all the difference. If you have somebody in a school building who can go sit and talk to the cafeteria workers while they're having their lunch for 10 minutes. You know, it doesn't have to be a big formal training, but just making connections with those people and making them feel included in the school climate and culture helps model those behaviors for the kids too.
Thank you, Sherry. Bladine, we had a question around, when you say implementing SEL, is there a single CASEL approach or is there a variety of approaches? Can you say a word about how communities make this their own?
Yeah, and I like that you edited off with communities making it their own, because there isn't one way for social emotional learning, and the best way for your community is the one that works for your context. So that is where having conversations across office, having conversations with school teams and families and caregivers and students will help you arrive at how social emotional learning should look in your district and in your space. But if you want more specific examples of SEL implementation, we definitely want to encourage you to head to our school guide for SEL implementation, schoolguide.casel.org. And I think we can make sure you have those resources. And that will give you kind of the step-by-step way of mapping out a plan for implementation at the school level. On the district level, if you're looking at, you can look at drc.casel.org, and that will give you kind of a step-by-step plan on how to actually map out systemic implementation for a district or for an organization. But I do want to say, you want to look at 4 areas, and we always elevate these 4 pieces. Is have a plan, like have a plan about how you want this to look. Have those conversations with your stakeholders. Sherry did an amazing job talking about just the voice of those that we're working with. And this is a great time to include folks in the process, because when you include them on the front end, you don't have to think about buy-in on the back end, you know? So really having conversations around, when we bring social emotional learning into our system, into our school, into our classrooms, what does that mean to you? How should our environment change based on what you're wanting to see for your young people and for your adults in this building? And I think so, building a plan, looking at adults, we talked about looking at adults, focusing on students, practicing just explicit instruction on making sure that they have opportunities to learn the competencies, practice the competencies, but also sit in an environment that fosters opportunities for everyone to model these competencies is absolutely important. And then the last piece I would add is learn from what you're doing. As you implement, take a step back every now and then and ask yourself, is this what we intended to have happen? And if the answer is no, go back to the drawing table, bring those stakeholders back in, have conversations again, have a space of reflection where you can really think about, is what we're doing actually changing the trajectory for young people? If the answer is no, think again, plan again, start over, and keep going with it.
Thank you, Bladine. And that framework emerged from the work we've done with the districts that you saw speaking in that video. And I think you're absolutely right that it provides a sort of guidepost and a process for you, but you are going to make it relevant to your local community. So great question. I think as all of us, we saw a few questions in the chat around, COVID is still very much a backdrop to how schools are operating right now. And folks are interested to hear, how are you creating sustainable structures, professional learning in the face of teacher shortages, the demands that we're seeing, and trying not to add one more thing to folks' plate. So Sherry, maybe I will throw this to you first, if you would.
Yeah, time is a challenge right now, and not adding things to plates. We've seen some great adult training being done in 25 to 30 minute segments, and focusing on, here's a skill, we can work on this, or here's 25 minutes on self-care and mindfulness for adults. So we've seen, and it's all been virtual, and it's kind of been on demand to some degree. A district will say, you could come to this at noon during your lunch break, or you could come to it after school. The other place we've seen the most impact lately is in those school-based PLCs. When teachers are working together in small groups anyway, whether they're planning lessons or doing whatever they're doing, working in those settings to use the SEL signature practices with a warm welcome, engaging activities, optimistic closure, and taking a minute to talk about SEL in those small groups that are already functional is another good place we've seen people kind of wedging the work in this time where there's no time.
Thank
I would
you.
probably, I'd add to that. Love what you just mentioned, Sherry, about just finding those times that already exist so that you're not increasing or adding more time. I would also add, where are the natural touch points to what teachers and school staff are already doing? For some of them, it could be how you plan your lessons out. It could be the way that you allow students to be a part of what happens in the classroom. Where are the opportunities that you can create for young people to have more opportunities to collaborate with one another? It doesn't add more time. It just is a different approach to how you do what you're already planning to do in the lesson anyway. My other piece is, if you're at the planning level at the district office, where are the ways that you can integrate the SEL work into the strategic plan that most teachers, most principals, that everyone is focused in on? So I would say if they're looking at academic integration and how we actually create space for more student collaboration. That's an SEL inroads right there. If you're looking at ways to elevate student participation or ways to increase student voice in the classroom so that there's not as much teacher voice in the classroom, that's an SEL intervention right there. So identify the ways in which teachers are looking and school teams are looking for opportunities to bring more social emotional learning into their process. They just may not know that that's what it is. So at the district level, if we can find those and support them with that, you'll have more time to support them in those areas because they're already looking for opportunities.
That's a great point, Claudine. I'd say at the campus level too, we've talked with teachers and principals about noticing and naming what you're already doing, because there's so much that people are already doing that has always been part of good teaching. And it's about promoting SEL skills. So how do we help reinforce that for teachers, which then also makes it feel like less of another thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we celebrate what they're already doing and build on it? Yeah, absolutely.
Great answers. And I think going back to sort of the notion that social emotional learning is foundational to all learning. And, we have to tend to the well-being of our adults and our young people so that any learning can take place, particularly after these last year and a half. So I think as much as we can return to that conversation is helpful as well. So great insights. Thank you, Bladine. Thank you, Sherry. We had a good question around, do I have to be a professional in SEL in order to really do this work? This came from a youth development educator. And Sherry, I know you've done a lot of work in this area, so I'll throw this to you first. What would you say to this person?
No, you don't have to be a professional. Every single human being on the planet is working on social and emotional skills, and you've got great skills to work on and to work with already. So when we talk about working with adults, we talk about learning, collaborating, and modeling. So if maybe you think about your skills, and there's a great adult self-assessment on the school guide for sure, probably in the DRC as well, where you can look at your own SEL competencies and kind of think about where are you strong and where do you want to grow more. And then it's about collaborating with other people, just talking with them and modeling your skills. You do not have to be a professional. Out of school time professionals have been doing this work under the guise or the term of youth development for a long time. We've done some partnering with the Forum for Youth Investment and the Weichert Center, and know that the frameworks and the skills line up really closely together between what CASEL talks about as SEL and what the Forum and Weichert talk about as youth development. So it is not about being a professional, is that the right word? Sorry. It's about caring about the work and just keeping on talking about it with young people and adults.
I love that, Sherry. I would only add that you can be very professional and know absolutely everything about social emotional learning and not live any of it out. So I think it really is, what are you modeling? How are you showing up? In addition to what you know about it. When you have that stance of, I want to bring my best self, I want to continue to reflect on who I am as an individual and how I show up and how I create spaces for young people so they can show up in their own authenticity. Any learning that you add to that will only augment it that much more. So you are positioned perfectly to do amazing work for young people.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Bladine, I'm going to pass this next question to you first. And the question was around, what are the most important skills for adults to model when we talk about SEL modeling for adults? And then how do you begin that process with adults? So would love to hear what you're thinking about that.
Wow, the most important skill. That's hard to land on one. I have been really thinking about 3 words particularly, but I will say walking in your own authenticity is probably one of the biggest pieces that you can give any young person. When they see an adult who can be authentically who they are without apology, can approach life with a sense of humility, recognizing that there's always more to learn, that there is a vulnerability that they're willing to step into and make mistakes and say things that just might not be right, but they're open to hearing about that from another young person or from a colleague. That creates a space for young people to do just that themselves. And so I will say personally, as a parent, I have learned a lot about being authentic. And when we can sit across from a young person who knows that we're being true to who we are, it opens up the space for them in their own packaging, their own identity, that they can own who they are and say, yes, this is who I am. I'm not perfect. I'm learning. It just creates this space where everyone can truly create just an understanding of, I am 100% who I am at all times. There is more for me to learn, but I am okay with that. So that was a whole bunch of skills, but I would just say being authentic, being okay with that, and then just applying just a lens of humility, vulnerability, and self-compassion. When you recognize that you've missed the mark, just taking a step back, looking at self and just being like, it's okay, I missed it, I'm gonna try again. That creates such a container for young people to be able to step into life with whatever issues, whatever elements they bring with them, recognizing that life will support them. So I would say that.
Sherry, did you want to add any insights on adult
Yeah,
SEL?
Bladine, I was listening to you, reflecting on thinking about those as parenting skills and important for me as a parent, and then thinking as an educator, as a co-worker, as an adult in the rest of society, that's still just as important. And then I was thinking about the 5 competencies. If we go back to those 5 core competencies, they are interrelated. They all depend on each other all the time. And that self-awareness piece, starting with the identity of who you are and what you're feeling. We don't take time to know what we're feeling often. So I think it's that authenticity and taking time to know who you are and what you feel. Starting with self-awareness is kind of where you have to start, right?
Yeah, and I've seen in the districts we work with that, as much as we can model that at each layer of the organization, so that principals are experiencing that in the meetings they are attending, teachers are experiencing that, central office teams are experiencing that, then you truly start to have an SEL culture and climate that's beginning to be built. So thank you both. We have a couple questions which I'm going to combine here around, how do we engage everyone in this sort of vision setting around SEL, and how do we connect to those who may be more resistant to SEL? So would love to hear your experiences both in your own leadership or in working with other districts. Bladine, do you want to talk about that process?
Yeah, I would say engaging others in SEL is one of the biggest lessons that I have learned and have seen is to take a timeline for your work and to expand it. Engaging folks takes time. And if you create a timeline that is so constricted and you have deadlines that you need to meet, it's really difficult to stay true to your desire to have this be a shared process. So what I'd say, first of all, is expand your timeline, give yourself more space. I know it's easier said than done, because in districts we have deadlines and we have, deliverables. But I think it's a case that's worth making to any supervisor that you speak with, to anyone who's pushing for a plan. Here are a few caveats we can do without having to run it through everyone. But if we're looking at truly systemic change with social emotional learning, we're going to have to invest the time to bring the voices to the table. And I think the other way to think about engagement is, where are the touch points that you already have with caregivers? In DC, when we did the work, there was the superintendent had a cabinet for every stakeholder. There's the family cabinet, the parents cabinet, there was a student cabinet, there was a teacher's cabinet, so we started there. And we were at every cabinet, putting in front of them ideas and thoughts that we had, and to really just get some ideas of, how does this landing for you? Does this make sense for you as a family member? Does this make sense as a caregiver for your child, for us to be thinking about SEL in this way? and really took their feedback into our planning processes moving forward. If you don't have a cabinet, or if you're at a different level or different organization, find the touch points that already exist. If there's PTA meetings, if there's, back to school nights, parent teacher conferences, wherever those spaces already exist, create opportunities to share about what's happening and to create more spaces for individuals to be involved in the process. One thing that this pandemic has given us is the insight that we can have virtual meetings. So people do not need to be rushing from work, and that our families, and sometimes myself as a parent, getting from work to a meeting is really, really hard. So finding out from families, how would you like to meet? How would you like to be engaged in this process? And then from whatever answers you get, create those spaces so that you have opportunities to hear. I would also finally add that with young people, they have a lot to say if we would just create the space for them to share it. So and I would say stay clear of just the student government, because you only have a small subset of students there. But what are the many different ways that you can engage the voices of young people to really hear what they have to say around the plans that we have for them, so that they can be involved in the process, is something that I would recommend. I think there was also a question. One more thing. I think there was a question around, what do you do if people are resistant to SEL? There's a lot that we can say there. What I would say, first of all, is to find out what the resistance is around. I think we make a lot of assumptions, and even those that are resistant to SEL may come in with assumptions. And if we could create the space for more authentic listening and more perspective taking with a bit of empathy, I think we can probably dismantle a lot of the different assumptions, fears sometimes that people enter the conversation with around SEL. So create spaces for conversation and true listening.
That's exactly where I was going, Bladine, too, thinking about that. Once you have the people at the table, how do we not just give them a definition and give them a vision, but take time to say, what do you think this means? What do you think this is? How does this connect to things you already know, that you already do? And really listen to what they want. Lots of times we'll start with, what are the hopes and dreams you have for your child? And where do you hope they come out of school with? And when you really take time to listen to families and teachers and students talk about that, the quadratic equation is seldom on that list. Their hope and dream for their child is that they come out being a problem solver, being compassionate, being empathetic. And then you've got a really easy way to tie SEL to what they're already dreaming about, and gives you kind of a footing to go from.
Thank you both. I could keep going on this all day long, but we have come to the end of our time. Thank you to our participants for those incredibly insightful questions, and our district leaders from across the country, and to Sherry and Bladine. It's been a pleasure. I will pass it back to Emily. Thank you.
Thank you.